welcome to my video. If you do find it helpful, please like and subscribe. Cheers. Today I'm going to show you how to build a dynamic interactive dashboard like the one we're looking at here, where you can provide your user a set of different filters and case selectors in this example for them to drill into various output graphs that you have. For example, this dashboard here has a filter for different products that you may sell or have modelled, and different customer types and all the different years that you may have forecast out. And we also have down here the employee growth over time, which is this top left graph. So using these slices, you allow your user to drill into all these graphs and information without providing a whole lot of graphs on one tab, so it creates a very dynamic experience and allows them to drill into their own insight. So we'll work on building something very similar to this, and I'll show you all the steps that you need to do to create it. So here I've got a blank sheet. What you need to have to set this up is you may have a model. This is just a basic example that forecasts out for 10 years. So we may have from December 18, you may have a couple of years of actuals, and it may forecast out to the year 2027, for example. And we may have here, all I've shown is the different revenue lines. So as I was showing you before, we have 3 different products and we sell them to 2 different customers to have total revenue. Of course, you'll have a lot more information in your own model based on what you can essentially model and divide up your revenue. That will determine how you will be able to set up your graphs and what insight you can give. So first thing you need to do is, of course, set up a blank tab like this, getting ready for a dashboard. What I like to do is make it so it fits in one nice screen, and I just hide all the rows and columns that are not going to be used. Then we have to set up a data table like this. So I've set mine up to speed up the process, but what you'd have to do is set up all your categories at the top, and ideally what you'll do is link them to your live output. So for example, on our financials tab, we had these different years out here, and you want to be pulling through these numbers for product 1, customer X, these sale figures. So you'll have product 1, customer X, and I want you to pull through the sales figures here. We may also have gross profit per product for that customer and also EBITDA, but this is just an example. And of course you can have this however you're able to cut your data. It may be different revenue types. For example, it might be a software company and you might have recurring revenue or different professional service types. And you're only really limited to what you can produce in your model. Now, not every line has to be used in your data table. So here I'm using employees and employee division, and I'll also be using it for year, and it doesn't have to relate to any of this information here. So that's why down the bottom here there's missing information. That doesn't matter. So what you need to do is create this table and link it to your live outputs. So we can highlight this data here, and if you hit Control T, it says create table, and that's what we want to do. We want to create a table out of our data, and when we do that, it will change the formatting like this. The reason we do this is so if you add data onto your table, it will automatically update later. So coming back to our dashboard, you want to ideally have planned in advance how you want to set up your dashboard. So if we come back to this one here, we've selected to have 5 graphs, or 6 if you count these 2 here as individual graphs, so 5 different spots, and we're going to have a panel over here for different filters and selectors. What you can do is go to Insert, and you have Shapes, and what I did was initially created a nice curved box like this. Using this here, you can change the curvature of the corners and set it up in the middle of your dashboard. So I'll copy paste the one that I had in my original one just to speed things up a little bit. And now we've got our background similar to this one. Now this is a trick that I learned on another YouTube video, and what we'll do is I'll copy this across, But essentially, instead of creating different tiles, different squares, individual shapes, and having to line them up, you can actually create an object like this in PowerPoint, and I'll show you how to do this now. Okay, so come into PowerPoint, and we're going to insert a shape. It's going to be a big rectangle, like this, similar to the one we had, and then insert another rectangle, but it's going to be a small little line, like this, and we're going to use that to break our big tile up into smaller tiles. So I quite like the shape to be like this. We're going to duplicate this, and I'll turn it over to cut it in half this way and find the middle of the shape, and then what we're going to do is make this as wide as the shape, and then I can click this one here, just do one at a time. So drawing, format, merge shapes, subtract, and then we'll do the same with this one here, and we'll do that again, subtract, and then now we're getting a nice shape like we had in our original one. So I'll use the shape that I already had from my other one just to speed things up, and then that means that when you move it around it's one big block and you don't have to continually line up your different tiles. I'll bring this square across as well, and what we want to do is line this up nicely with our other shape, and now we have our setup. Cool. So the next thing I'll do is we want to set up some nice headings like these ones here. So if you come back into this model, into our dashboard example, and we hit insert, we can go to shape again, and I'm going to create a shape like this, and I'll make it a fill similar to the other colours, so I like to keep consistent colouring. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this little slider here to make a completely rounded edge on the end of my shape, and I'll decide how long I want it to be. So then we will insert a text box in here, and it's going to be my revenue and EBITDA forecast. And what I want to do is I don't want this to have any fill or any outline, so I'll remove those options. And then I want my font size to be a bit bigger. I want it to be white because I think it looks nice and clean. And if you go to page layout, you can use the align feature to align these so they're perfectly in the middle. Maybe I want it to be bold. I think that looks quite nice. So how do you get these little icons here? Office 365 now has new functionality that allows you to insert some of these icons. So if you go to the insert ribbon, and there's this new feature here called icons. So if we click that, and maybe I want to go to the business section or commerce, for example, so here's the one that I used earlier. Select that and hit insert, and it will insert this graphic into your dashboard. I'm going to make mine white so it's consistent, and then we might minimize it, and I'll put it up here like this. So once you have your first title set up, what you want to do is grab all three of these objects that we just had. If you hit Control Shift and hold it, then this little plus icon will come up, and what I'll do is I'll drag that down and it will create a brand new one so that we know that everything's consistent. And I'll do this again here, set that on all of them, and it keeps them all nice and aligned. So I'll leave these as placeholders for now, and we'll rename them once we get them in. So that's how to set up the headings. So to create our first graph, we come back to our data tab, we go up to the insert, and we're going to insert a pivot chart and pivot table, and we'll select the table that we created earlier of our live data and hit OK. That's going to create these two things here. So to create our first graph, we'll do our revenue and EBITDA. So I'll bring my year category down to this axis, and I'll use revenue and EBITDA as my two values. Now you can see here we've created a graph. I'll keep this pivot table up here so I know what I have, and I'll cut this graph and I'll put it on my dashboard. Now obviously it doesn't look too nice at the moment, so we have to do a bit of formatting. So if you right click the filter options on the graph, you can select this, hide all field buttons on chart, and that will remove all those fields. I like to have my legend on the bottom in this case, and then of course we don't want to have any fill, and I don't want to outline on my graph. Now I want to have my font color in white, and I'm going to increase the font size and maybe make it bold. I'll also remove these horizontal grid lines to make it a bit cleaner, and perhaps we might have an outline on this y-axis as well. Now we need to come up to design on our graph, and I'm going to go change chart type, and then what I'm going to do is go to a combo chart, and I want my revenue to be a line, and I want my EBITDA to be a clustered column. So this is starting to look a wee bit similar to what we had in our original dashboard. So to get it looking exactly like the one we had in here, there's a few other steps. So what we want to do is come back to our data. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put revenue in again. It's going to create this second field here. I'll come back to my dashboard. Let's reset this. So I'll change it and I'll come to the combo. I want one of my revenue items to be a line, and then I want my second one to be area, and then I want my EBITDA to be stack column. So now we're starting to get similar to what our previous graph was. So I'll then format this line, and I want it to be white, and maybe I want it to be a little bit thicker. The area, now this is the sort of tricky bit, is we're going to fill it, and we're going to fill it as a gradient. So if we go to fill gradient, more options, and we can choose gradient fill here, and what I'm going to do is I'll select a nice blue that I might like, so something similar to what we've already had in our master dashboard, and then at this end of the gradient I want it to be 100% transparent. So see, now we're starting to get this effect here. So how does this one look? It's a bit of a different color, so I'll come back to here. Maybe this needs to be a little bit darker. Maybe I'll remove that stop. And I might actually want it to be a little bit darker. Same one for here. Now you can see that this is completely merged into the background, so I don't really want that. So I'll change this color option to make it a little bit lighter, and perhaps the same with this one here. And we're starting to get a similar effect to what I had in here. So now we've sort of set up our gradient. I might make my bars a bit wider. So if you right click and go to Format Data Series, it will open up this window, and I'll set my gap width to maybe 75%, and I might make these the darker blue that we had in our other one with a bit of a white outline. Maybe that white outline's a wee bit too much, so I'll dull it down to a bit of a grey, and then we're starting to look a bit more similar to this again. So the last thing that I'll do, well, the last two things I'll do is I might create a marker. So the marker options selection in here, and we'll go to built-in, and we might make a wee diamond, and I'll have this as white as well, and we might increase the size of that to about a 7. So now we've got these nice little diamonds here that someone can hover over and they can see the value of the revenue in that year. And so the final thing I'll do is, if we right click this revenue line here and go to design on our graph, I can go add chart element, and I might want to add lines, and I'll add drop lines. So we're going to do a similar process as before in terms of gradient. So I want these to be white, but I don't want them to intersect with my bars. So what I'll do is that I want this to be a gradient line, and I want this end to be white, and I'll remove these ones in between. I'll also make this one white, but we want it to be 100% transparent. So you can see now at the bottom it's starting to become transparent. What I'll do is I'll add a new one. I'll also make that one 100% transparent. And now it doesn't interfere with my lines anymore. You might want to make them a little bit thicker. That's up to you. So there we go. I'll also format this axis here. So if I come to format axes and go to number, I can change this, and maybe I want it to be number like that. I want it to be 0 decimal places, and I want it to show in thousands, so it only shows just 35. So there we go, we've created our first graph. Now we can start creating our pivot charts. So chart, filters, heading, and I'll copy paste this in here. And I like to line things up, so we'll align this center aligned so it sits in there perfect. And then what you want to do is click this graph again. We're going to go to Analyze, and this is where we start creating the filters. So we go Insert Slicer, and what do I want to filter it on? I don't really want to filter this graph on year because I want it to show revenue over time, but I may want to filter it on product, and I may want to filter it on customer type. So if I hit OK, that will create these two slices here. So then we want to format them appropriately so they look nice on our page. So if we click this, we have slicer tools at the top, and if I go to options, this one's only got 2 options, so maybe I'll make it 2 columns wide like this. We'll just move this one out of the way for now, and I'll make it small, and maybe we'll set it here. Now to format this slicer, if we click the slicer and go Slicer Tools Options, you can create different slicers, different default slicer types. So we want to add a new one. I've created one already, and I'll set it as my default. If we select one of these existing ones and hit Duplicate, and we call it New Slicer Style, and hit OK, and I'll come back to that, and now we have our new one here. We can modify it, and you've got all these different options here as to how you can modify your slicer. So maybe we want to format that. You may want your fill to be similar to the color that we had, but unfortunately until you apply the formatting it won't apply to the slicer. So if I apply that now, see it's not quite exactly what we had in our other one, but you play around with the formatting to get it how you want. There's different things you can do. You can change the colors when the mouse is hovered over the button, and then what color the button goes when you click it as well. But I will use the slicer format that I already created because it matches exactly how I want it to against this backdrop, so it looks like it blends in essentially. We'll also apply that same theme to our product slicer, and maybe I'll drag it out this wide just so it fits the whole thing. And then now you can see when we click our slicer and our filter, what it's doing is it's filtering our data table. It's filtering this data table here based on these slices. So if I come back to here and I go show field values, I want to be able to filter this on product and customer type. Oops. So sometimes your pivot tables will grow like that, and unfortunately they will cover up some of your formatting like they just did there. So, and I'll have these filters on that table that we had. So now we'll create one of our next graphs. So we might create the product profitability graph. So what this graph was a set of different bar charts that shows each product, its revenue, gross profit and EBITDA, but obviously it's just an example. So how do we do that one? If we come back into our data again, we're going to do the same process as before. We're going to insert a pivot chart. I want it to be on table 1 again. Oops. So yes, you want to insert it on your same data tab, so I'll just delete that. We want to insert a pivot chart. I want it to go in my existing worksheet, and I'll select here, and then it's going to create another chart for us in another pivot table. So this one here, we may want to be able to filter it by year and by customer type, and then I want to have revenue, gross profit and EBITDA, and I'm going to have product as my row. So now we'll cut this graph and I'll put it on my dashboard, and we'll set it up here so it's looking nice like our other one. Right click the filter buttons and we'll hide those again. And how do we have it set up here? So I have again my legend on the bottom. So we go to design, chart element, legend, bottom. I again want this to have no fill, no outline. I'll remove these lines. I'll make my font size white, and what was my font size in this? 12, so we want to be consistent. So I'll make this 12 as well. I'll also put a white border on this, and we'll format the axes. So number here, 0 decimal places. We want this to be a tick, and I want to display my units in thousands. And then I want my font to be bold. We'll format our data series. I want a 0 series overlap, which is going to group them all together. And then maybe we'll do 75% again to make them a wee bit wider. And then we'll create each one in a different color format. So we'll have the dark blue that we used earlier, and then maybe a lighter blue. We may choose this one. Oops, no, that's not a good one because it hides in the background. So I'll choose that one, and then maybe this one can be the lighter blue. And I might make them all outlined slightly, but this is up to you, how you would like to outline yours. There we go. So now I've just realized the names of these. We don't want to show the area that relates to the second lot of revenue that we put in, just so we could format the graph. And if we come into here, we can actually right click these and go to value field setting, I believe, and we can change this to be called revenue. I'll also do the same with this one here, so we'll call it EBITDA. It says the field name already exists, so sorry, it should have done it for revenue as well. So if you just put a space after it, then it will allow you to do it. We'll do the same on these, so we'll make this revenue. We'll change this to gross profit, and we'll change this one to EBITDA. Now our graphs have updated accordingly and they're looking quite nice. What I also want to do is I'll want to analyze, and I want to insert a slicer, and now we're going to have it for year, so we can divide it by different years. I'll go up to my slicer option and we'll format it again so it looks nice, and I'll put it over here. Maybe we'll have it this wide, and I'll break it into 2 columns. So we've got 10 different years here, and it'll be a 5 by 2. So if we select all of these as well, I like to align everything as I said before, so maybe align them all, and then I also want to make sure that they're all the same width. So if you right click, you can go size and properties, and we'll make these all 9 centimeters wide. So they all almost were 9 centimeters wide anyway, which is good. So now they all perfectly align. So now you can see our year is filtering this chart here, which is great. But we don't want to filter by different products on this one, but we would want to filter by customer. So what we do here is if we right click this, we can go to report connections. What we want to do is connect this slicer to the new pivot table that we made. So I'll hit OK. Now this slicer is connected to both of my charts. The product one is only connected to this one, and the year one is only connected to this one at this stage. So I'll insert another icon for our products, and maybe I'll just search product. No, it doesn't really come up, so maybe they have box. Maybe I'll insert this one here. It inserts it again. Black is standard, but what I'll do is make it white, and we'll line it up with this. So now we have 2 graphs here that are both linked up to our slices. So what's the next graph that we want to make? Maybe we'll make this EBITDA bridge. It's an interesting one. So I'll come back to here. We'll rename this for now. Unfortunately with this one here, you can't create a pivot chart, but what we can do is we can create a pivot table. So if I create a pivot table we go insert again, and I'll go pivot chart and pivot table, existing worksheet, and I want to insert it somewhere down here. Now what do we want to show? We want to show our revenue, how that's reduced by our cost of goods sold to give us our gross profit, and then what other overheads we had to get to EBITDA. So if I come back to here, we're going to want to have revenue, gross profit, and EBITDA, but you cannot actually create if we go to change chart type, you can't create a waterfall using this. So what I'll do is I'll delete this, but I still want to keep these numbers. So I'll keep them all here, and then we want to be able to filter this by year, by product, and by customer. And I'll just format this, it looks nice. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go revenue, cost of goods sold, gross profit, and then your other overheads to give EBITDA. So I'm going to have my revenue equal to this cell here, because it's going to be filtering and changing. So that is M44. Gross profit is going to equal O44, and EBITDA is going to equal N44. Now if I do this one minus this one, we get the negative that will give us our gross profit, and I'll copy that down here as well. And now we can create a chart based off this. So if I go to all charts, and if we go to waterfall, now I can create my waterfall chart. So I'll remove my chart title. We want gross profit. So if you right click the bar, you can select it and select set as total. We obviously want to do that for EBITDA as well, so it's a total. and then I'll bring that onto my dashboard. So again, I'll fast forward this, but we want to format our graph accordingly to look like the other ones. And then you can also, so we have it consistent with here, which is actually in millions. You can create a custom format, and what we'll do is maybe I'll select this one here, and you can go to format code. So we'll delete these off because I don't want decimal places, and then the semicolon represents positive numbers on this side, and then the next one will be negative numbers. So maybe we don't want it to be red, but maybe I do want their brackets around it. And then if we hit add, except I want to do that to these numbers, to my label options. Format data labels, number, custom, and we want to do the same thing I just did here. So we will change this format code so we have brackets around it, hit add, and now these show as minuses. You can also choose where you want them to be, so maybe I want them to be inside end. Format my data labels inside end, and then they'll sit in here like this. Show connector lines, and we'll remove those lines. So then maybe I want to format these again using my same dark blue that we've been using. Except we will want to show our negatives as a different colour, and I'll give them the same outline as before. We'll change our weight, and my down bars, you have to select them individually, unfortunately. Awesome. So now we have a nice waterfall, and what we want to do is close this area here. We're going to right click our slicer, report connections, and I want to connect these to my new pivot table that I just made. So we do that for all of these here. I don't want to connect this to my pivot table 4, which was related to product profitability. I just want to create this one on product 6. And then if we change year, we also want to connect that to number 6. And then now we've got all these graphs that are all linked together. So we're starting to get there. So I'll bring my icons again into here. So maybe I want to insert a new icon, and maybe it's a bar chart to show different building blocks to EBITDA. I'll line that up here. Okay, so now we'll create our next charts. So we want to create these wheels here. So I'm going to take these over to save some time. I'll paste them in here, we'll stick them over here, and we'll call this will be our margin analysis area. And I'll insert a new icon for that. Yeah, maybe something like this is appropriate because we're drilling into the margins. And I'll format that as white again. And then we're going to create two donut charts. So we'll come back to our data again. What you can also do for the slices, I'll come back to this shortly. So now we're going to create our donut charts. So again, we'll go insert, pivot chart and pivot table, existing worksheet, and maybe I'll put it over here. And these are quite simple charts to make, but there's a new thing here that I'll teach you. So what we want is to have gross profit as a value. I want my year, product, and customer type to all be filters. Oops, except I've done what I've done earlier. So we'll put that in here. And I'm going to move this down a little bit. So year, product type, and customer type. And then we'll rename this to gross profit. And I'll format it. And what we want to do is we can create a field. If we click it, we can go to Analyze, Field Items and Settings and go Calculated Field. And what we want is, if we want gross profit as a percentage and it's a percentage of revenue, we need to know what gross profit is and what the remainder is to get to revenue. So essentially your cost of goods. So what we're going to do is we're going to call this difference, and it's going to equal a formula. So we want it to equal revenue, and then I'll hit minus gross profit, insert, and then we go add, okay. And what we've got here now is our two numbers required. So if I go design, change chart type, and come to apply, and maybe we want a donut. So I want my values to be in rows instead of columns. And now we've got our graph. So I'll cut this and we'll put it onto our dashboard. And I'll speed up the formatting again for you. Okay, so now we're going to format this data series, and I want it to maybe be a little bit thinner. So we can change the donut hole size here to maybe 65%. Yeah, maybe a little bit thicker, so 60%. I'm going to make this blue. I want it to be white, so we'll fill it white. And in this colour here, I want to select as maybe some type of blue. And what I'm going to do is go to more fill colours, and I'm going to change it and make it quite transparent. So then we can do maybe an outline like we had before, and now we're creating something similar to what we had in our other dashboard here. So maybe we want it to be a little bit thinner, so I'll come back to here. We'll change this donut hole size to maybe 70%. That looks a bit better. Maybe I want my outline to actually be a little bit less weight. And we're getting something similar. So now we've created our donut. So how do we get the number inside it that's a live number that changes as you filter your information? So what we need to do is, if we come back to our dashboard that we're building, and I'll come into my data, what I want to do is I'm going to create a calculation, so to get my gross margin, and it's going to equal my gross profit, which is T15, and it's going to be over the sum of these two numbers, and that gives us this number here, so gross margin. And what we can do is we come back to our dashboard. We will insert a text box here, or actually I'll use this one here and I'll duplicate it, and we'll put it in the middle and delete this text. And if you come up to the formula bar and hit equals, then we can go to our data, and I'll select this data here, and now we've got it linked to this number. So I want it to be a bit bigger, I want it to be bold, I want it to be white, maybe a bit bigger than that. And now we've got our live gross margin. So again, we come over to our different slices, and I want this linked to all of these. So I'll hit report connection, and I want it to now be linked to my new pivot table for all of these. So report connection, report connection. So now we're starting to get quite a few pivot tables. It can be confusing to know which pivot table is which. So I'll do that one here. I'll show you how this works. So now all of these graphs are starting to get all linked up based on our different filters, which is great. So if I come back to our data here, so to get rid of it just being named a generic pivot table name, if we come into here, you can actually rename your pivot table. So we'll call this one gross margin chart. I'll call this one revenue chart. We can call this one, I think this was our product chart. So pivot table fields, product chart. And this one here we'll call waterfall chart. Now when you want to change your report connections, you know which one you're connecting to, which will help, and I should have shown you earlier. So now we want to create another version of this, but we're going to have it for EBITDA margin. So I'm going to create another pivot chart and pivot table based on table 1. And we're going to have EBITDA as the value. We're going to put all our filters in again. And what we're going to do is click this, do the same process. So analyze field items and sets, calculated field difference. And it's going to equal revenue minus EBITDA. Hit OK. And I'll pull that difference into here as well. We want our values to be in rows, not in columns. And then we'll change our chart type to be donut chart. Cool, we're getting similar to what we had before, so I'll cut and paste that onto our dashboard. And I'll speed up the formatting again to make it look like the last one. So we want to double check what this one is formatted at, so we can do the same. So it's 80%, 72, 113, 188. Let's see if I can remember that. Just click the bar, more fill colors. It's going to be 72, 118, 188. And it's 80% transparent. So now we've got the same colors there. I want to do another outline, and I'll make it a wee bit wider. And now we've got two identical looking graphs, and we'll create another EBITDA margin calculation. So I'll drag these to line up here, and we'll do EBITDA margin, and it will equal this number here, which is equals S26. Oops, sorry, T27. T27 over the sum of these numbers, and we'll link that input to here. So this will now equal data, this cell, and I will format paint this one to be the same, and then we'll make sure that they're lined up. So if we go to page layout, align, and we'll align the middle of them. And then what we can also do is go page layout, and we'll align these to be center aligned. And the same with this, so that we know that they're nice and square. and we'll move them across to be centered into the middle of our tile here. And now we have, now we need to link it up. So I'll go back to my data. We'll rename this pivot table to be EBITDA margin. I'll come to my dashboard. I'll right click my slicer and we'll link it up to the EBITDA margin pivot table. Now we have a pretty dynamic looking chart here. We have a pretty dynamic looking dashboard, should I say. And we've created most of our graphs. Now the last one that we'll do was the employee graph. So I'll come back into here again. We're going to create another pivot chart, as I'm sure you would have guessed. Existing location, I'll put it below this one over here. And it's going to be employees, and employees. So that will actually be a filter, the division, because that's the only thing we can filter this one on. But we also want to know what it's been over time. So how have employees grown over time? Maybe is the example here. So I don't want decimal places on this. And we've got our graph here. So I'll bring it onto the dashboard, wherever it went. Over here. And I'll speed up the formatting for you. And I might change it to a line chart. So to get this area similar to what we were using before, what I'll do is we will add in employees again in our pivot table. So pivot table, not options, sorry. Oh, but I can name this at the same time. So employee table. And if we go show field list, and if we put employees in again, and come back to my dashboard, what we'll do is we'll change this to a combo chart. Design, change chart type, combo, and we'll change sum of employees to be a line, and then I want this one to be area below it, like we did for this graph here. So how thick is this line? So it's 3 points in white, and I want it to be consistent, so we'll make this one white as well. I'll make it 3 points, and we had a diamond marker. So if I see what this one was, come to my marker options, it's size 7 and it's white as a diamond, so I'll do the same here. Outline this while I'm at it. So, sorry, coming back to where we were. Marker options, built-in, diamond. I want it to be white and size 7. So now we've got a consistent theme, and then we have to add our drop lines. So add chart element lines, drop lines, and I'll format this one here first. So here we had an area chart, and we've got our 3 colours, so I'll line this one up to be very similar. Cool, and Excel's actually just done it for me, so that helped very quickly. I'm not sure if it always automatically does that, but if not, apply the same methodology that we did at the start when we created our revenue chart. So my outline here, someone's calling me, my chart here, we're going to do a gradient, and I'm going to have white at this side and maybe this one will be white as well. I'll remove this one, and this one here can be 100% transparent, and maybe this one will be 50% transparent. And how thick do we have these ones over here? I'll check. So what were my drop lines? They were 1.5 wide. So we'll do the same here. I'll make these ones 1.5 wide, and now we've got some consistent graphs. So we need to create a slicer so we can change the different employee divisions. So this will be my employees. I'll go to Analyze, Insert Slicer, and we want to do it on employee division. Now I want to format this to look like my other ones. Now we can filter this graph based on our different employee divisions. Okay, so we've created quite a good series of graphs here. I'll just insert my last icon, and maybe it will be people. So we can insert something like that, or what's a nice looking one? Maybe this one here is fine. I'll make him white again, and we'll make him a bit smaller. Sometimes it inserts inside a graph if you're not careful. So now we've got our employees. So now we've got a pretty fully functioning dashboard. Now you don't have to do the other steps that I'm going to show you next. You might just have all your chart filters here and that's it. Yeah, you can probably leave it here if you don't want to go into the advanced step that involves a bit of VBA. So now we've essentially got all our charts working nicely. They all filter as they need to. And yeah, they're looking pretty good. So the next stage, if you want to be able to change by different scenario types, so if we come back to our other version, we had these buttons here that we could use to change different cases. So if you're building a financial model for a forecasting period, you may have a base case, an upside case, or a downside case. And you may want to be able to run all those different scenarios without having to go change them somewhere. So let's say within our model we had our data, and what I'm going to do is I'll cheat a little bit to make it easier, but you probably have somewhere within your model that you can select, like this for example, we may have a scenario and it may have a drop down, and you can change your scenarios, and it may have different growth assumptions and that sort of thing. So let's say that we want to be able to change this, but we don't want to have to come to this admin tab. What you can do is, if we create some assumptions, and maybe base case is just 0% change, upside case maybe 15% in this first year, 20% in the second year, 25% difference. We'll just format these as percentages so we can see as we go. So this might be 20, 30%, 10%, and where are we there? So I need to go up to row 19. Cool. And what we'll do is maybe copy these all the way down. and then this might be negative that amount. So then our revenue in our data, because we wouldn't want this to be hard coded as I have here for an example, you'd want it linked directly to your financials. For the data, this might equal these numbers over here, and it's going to be multiplied by whatever case we have. So we'll say this will be live case, and this will say equals if this live scenario equals this, comma this, otherwise if, and we can copy paste this, if my live scenario equals upside case, which will be here, then I want this to equal AC10, comma, if it's neither of those, then it has to be this one here. So, and we'll close that off. And then what we can do is we'll test this. So if I change this in my admin tab to upside case, now we've got some live numbers here that I can use. So what I want to do is, just to show you guys, is I want this to equal all those numbers I had before. It's going to be times 1 plus whatever my live case is, and I'll copy that down and across. Oops, except, sorry, I want this to stay in X. And then now, depending on what case we have in this admin tab, will determine what numbers pull through onto our graphs. So there is one thing that you need to be aware of, and that is that pivot tables do not automatically refresh themselves. So if this number here is now live, this here would need to be refreshed to show that. So there's a few ways to get around this, which is fine. One thing that is very important to do is to create a check, and what we'll do is we will create this check here. So I've got it set up here, do my totals match, and what I'll say is we'll use this number here and it will be my check. I'll call it check here, and it will say equals if N24, which is my total revenue, equals the sum of all my revenue here, then B0, otherwise B1, so I know. And now we know that this is okay, so I've got this formatted here, so a 0 says okay, or a 1 would say error, and I'll just format paint this data, so now I know my check's okay. And now I'll link this check through to my data here. And on my dashboard, I have my master check here. So if something changes, I will be alerted up here, so it'll say check's okay. So if we change this now to base case, it'll say there's an error in the model. So someone can go here and say, why is there an error? They can follow this through, and they'll say, okay, my revenue's changed, but my pivot chart isn't, so I may need to refresh my pivot chart. So you may do this so it says if it's not okay, needs to refresh pivot table. So now if there's an error, except I need to spell that properly. Now if there's an error on my dashboard, when we change a case, or if any numbers change, we'll be notified to refresh the pivot table. So there's a quick, easy way to do that. What we do is you can either write it as a macro if you know how to do it, but if you're a beginner, you may want to record a macro. So what we need to do is go to the developer tab. We're going to record a macro and we're just going to call it refresh. And what you want to do is record it in this workbook for this example. And now we're recording, so up here it'll say stop recording, but what we want to do is hit data, refresh. What that's going to do is refresh your whole workbook. It'll refresh the pivot tables to make sure that it's bringing through the most up-to-date data, and we're going to hit stop recording. So that would have recorded a macro for us, except I have a lot here, so it's this refresh one. Now if we step into that macro here, all it does is this one line of code says active workbook refresh all, just so we know that it's refreshed. And then what I like to do is we can close this down. We could insert an icon, something like this refresh, maybe, if that's what you like. And maybe I'll put it over here. And we'll paint it white. In my other one, I didn't have, I used a different system. But now we can right click this and we can actually assign a macro. So I can assign my refresh macro to it, and maybe we want to alert the user, and it says use this to refresh. So now if someone comes in here and they change the case or your numbers change, says refresh pivot table, so it'll tell them in here as well. And what they can do is they can, except this is covering it, so they can click this button. What it does is completely refreshes your workbook and will update all your graphs. So that's probably the easiest way to get around this, except set it up nicely and intuitively so the user knows how to use it. Now the last step I want to show you, so maybe we actually might have this up here, or it might be over here perhaps. So it's close to my check, so we'll just do that again. If someone changed the case, it says refresh pivot table on our master check, so it says up here, and this says use to refresh. We click that, now everything's okay. So I better save this. Okay, and we've also got the live scenario selected in here as well, so this would pull through whatever the live scenarios we're running. So now if you want to know how to build these buttons here that cycle through the cases just like we have, and they automatically refresh, I can show you how to do those. So what we essentially want to do is we'll have these buttons here and we're going to assign macros to them. They're quite basic. We can write them, and I'll show you how to write them in this, and you can essentially just use the same code. Is when we click this button, we want it to change whatever the live scenarios to equal the base case, and then we also want it to refresh all the workbook. That's basically all it needs to do. There's a couple other little things, but I'll show you how to do that now. So firstly, we're going to insert our 3 buttons like this, and I want it to be lined up with the middle of my tile here. So if I go page layout, align center, now it's aligned in the center. Now we want 3 buttons for our 3 different cases, and I'll have this called base case, this called upside case, and this one called downside case. Now I want them all to be white. I want my text to maybe be a nice blue, bold. I want it to be a bit bigger. And I want it to be centered. So this is what my buttons are going to look like when they're off. So you'll have an off and on button, and maybe I'll just put a little bit of shadow behind it so it looks like it pops a little bit, stands off the page so it looks more like a button. So we actually need 6 buttons. We need an on button and an off button for each. So what you can do is highlight all of these, use Control and Shift, and it comes up with this little plus that you can see. And if we come across here, we'll create new ones. So these will be the white ones can be our off buttons, and these ones can be our on buttons. And then what we're going to do is we're going to format them to be a little bit different, and we'll make them consistent with how these are here. So white is off in this scenario and the blue is on. So I want these to be the same color as those ones down there. So I think it's that color, and it's got white text. And now we've got all 6 buttons that we need. So I'll drag these back over the top of this, and we have all 6 buttons. So if we then go to our drawing format, we can go to selection pane, and we've got all of these different buttons here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we can rename them. So if I bring all these off for a second over here, I can select this one, go to my selection pane. I know that it is rectangle rounded corner 28, so I want to rename it. It's going to be base case on. I'll select this one. This one here is going to be upside on. This one here is my downside on. This one here is base case off. This one here is upside off. And this one here is downside off. So now what I want to do is I want to create a macro for each of them. So to write the code, we're going to come into our VBA editor. If you go to developer, you can hit this Visual Basic button here. Now we're going to create these macros in this workbook, and we'll create it in, so this is my VBA project for dashboard build, and if I go into module 1, oops, sorry, we want to be in, oh yeah, we want to be in here. So I've actually already got these built for our last one, so this will be an easy way for us to assign them over. So this is the code that we'll need. There's a few things that we need to have happen, but we'll write these from scratch. So this was the refresh all button that we built before. If I create a new macro using sub, and we'll call it base case selection, and then hit enter, it'll create a new line for us. And then what we want to do is go with active sheet. So we want to do this with the sheet that we're on, and it's always going to be the dashboard sheet because that's the only place that this button is in. And what we want to say is similar to what I've got here. So we want to either make the shape appear or disappear. So I'm going to say dot shapes, and then in brackets base case on dot visible to say this is my shape. I've identified it through the name and what's its visibility status, and we're going to say equals true. So I want my base case on button to be visible. And then what else do I want? Well, we can copy paste this. So because we have 6 buttons, and we'll say upside on and downside on were our other names, and then base case off, upside off, and downside off. So what happens when we click base case on? When we have the base case on, I want to have my base case on button visible, but I want my other 2 on buttons to be not visible. So we change this to false. And then I want my base case off to also be false, but I want my 2 off buttons to be visible, so they need to be on. And then what else do we want to do? We can copy this from up here. We'll say, oh, after this has been run, I want to refresh my workbook. So, sorry, we go here first, we go end with, so that will end what we're doing here. And then in my workbook, I have my live scenario. So if I come back into my workbook, I have this here is called live scenario. It's a named cell, and we can name these to make it more dynamic. So I'm going to name this VBA underscore base case and hit enter. That will name it. We're going to call this one VBA underscore upside and this one VBA underscore downside. I'll show you why in a second. So if we come back to our VBA script, what do I want to happen? So I want my base case to be on, I want my other ones to be off to show which ones are on, and then I want my range, I want my live scenario, which is an input, to equal base case in this case. So I go range, I want it to equal live scenario, which is my cell name, and you say dot value, so what does the value in that cell equal, and I want it to equal range, and we just called it VBA underscore base case dot value. What that is saying is it's a simple copy paste macro, and it says set the live scenario value equal to whatever's in VBA base case value, which in this case is the word base case, and then I want it to refresh all of my workbook to ensure that my pivot tables are updated correctly. So if we close this now and I come back to my dashboard, and I want to assign the base case on button to my base case off button. So when you click the off button, it will change to be on. And what we'll do is we assign the macro and we find what it was called. So module 2 base case selection, and then when I click that, now these ones disappear and this one stays here. So I'll bring this one in line, and then what we'll do is if I come back to my selection pane and you make this a wee bit wider, you can actually change the visibility of these other ones. So I will also line these up on top of here. So selection pane, my upside should be on, but my upside on and my downside on should be off. So now it looks like this. So now if we come back to our VBA editor, Alt F11, we come back to the module that we're doing in. All we have to do now is copy paste this, and this one's going to be called upside selection. What happens when the upside is selected? This is now going to, my base case on is going to be off, my upside on is going to be on, which is true. So you just flip all the signs of these basically. My base case off is going to be on, my upside on is going to be false. And this here, my live scenario needs to now be VBA upside dot value refresh all. And we'll just quickly copy paste this again for our downside, and it will be called downside selection. And then what will happen here, this one will now become false, this one will now become true, this one will stay true, this one will become true and this one will become false. And then we can we can change this range, to be downside. So when it's selected downside, my base and upside buttons are off, but my downside on is visible, and then opposite for my off buttons. So if I close this now I want to assign the macro to my upside case, and it was called upside selection. This one I want to assign my macro, and I want it to be called, and it's the downside selection we just wrote. And now we have them all, so I can click upside case, downside case, or base case. And now we've got them all working exactly how they should. And set why is this? Because this is filtered, so that was incorrect to base my check off here. So I need to base this off a check that doesn't have a filter, essentially. So where do I have that? Maybe I need to create a new pivot chart. So a pivot table from table 1. I want it to go into my existing worksheet down here. And I want it to have all my revenue. And then what I'm going to do is I'll bring my check and I'll put it down here. And I'll move this to be this number. So now we know this is okay. And this is our check. So now my checks are okay. If we ever need to use this refresh button, we can. But we should be fine now using our selectors. So hopefully you followed that along. Sorry if it was too quick. If you need to obviously rewind and go back through, that's fine. If there's any questions or comments, please put them down below and I'll try to help you out. And if you've got any other ideas for other videos that you might want to see that we can apply sort of similar logic to, then let me know. Otherwise, if you found this helpful, please like and subscribe to my channel, Everyday Excel. Thank you very much.